Two quarterbacks, same decision, two completely different reactions from the NFL and the media that covers it. One man made a choice that every elite quarterback prospect before him made. He said he wanted to throw at his pro day instead of the combine, with his own receivers in his own environment. And the league turned on him. Anonymous scouts called him arrogant. Team executives told reporters he was the worst interview they'd ever sat through. One analyst compared him to Johnny Manziel. The story spread like wildfire, and by draft night, a man who was supposed to hear his name called in the top 10 was still sitting there in the fifth round. The other quarterback made the exact same call, said almost the exact same words, and the response? Praise, glowing interviews, stories about how smart and humble and team first he was. Same decision, one man got buried, one man got celebrated. The only thing that was different was who they were. My name's Odell, and today on Old School Sundays, we're talking about something that has been happening in this league for decades, and I've got the receipts to prove it. Before we get to Shedeur Sanders and Fernando Mendoza, you need to understand something. What happened in 2025 didn't start in 2025. The NFL has had an uncomfortable relationship with black quarterbacks for as long as the position has existed. For most of the league's history, the assumption was simple. Black men were athletes, not leaders. They could run, they could jump, but running an offense, reading a defense, making the kind of cerebral decisions that win football games, that was considered someone else's job. It took decades of proof just to get black quarterbacks taken seriously at the professional level. And even after the proof was there, even after Warren Moon, Randall Cunningham, and Donovan McNabb forced the conversation, the bias didn't disappear. It just got quieter. It went underground. It dressed itself up in the language of scouting. Researchers at Penn State studied over 175 NFL draft profiles written between 2008 and 2016. What they found was striking. When scouts wrote about white quarterbacks, they talked about leadership, intelligence, decision making, qualities that live inside a man. When they wrote about black quarterbacks, they focused on physical traits, athleticism, arm strength, mobility, the same kind of language you'd use to describe a running back. A separate study looked at over 3,800 descriptors used by NFL analysts over a 20-year period. The pattern held. When a black quarterback succeeded, analysts credited his athletic ability. When a white quarterback succeeded, they credited his football mind. And here's the part that hits hardest. A 2023 statistical analysis found that black quarterbacks are consistently undervalued on draft day, picked later than comparable white quarterbacks with the same measurables, the same production, the same film. The same study found that the benefit of the doubt extended to white quarterbacks for 10 to 12 years after being drafted. For black quarterbacks, that same grace period lasted 6 to 7 years. Then the clock ran out. This is the world Shedeur Sanders walked into when he declared for the 2025 NFL Draft. Not a level playing field, a system with a memory, a system that had already decided what kind of quarterback he was before he threw a single pass. Shedeur Sanders came out of Colorado as one of the most decorated quarterbacks in that program's history. He threw for over 4,000 yards in back-to-back seasons. He completed passes at a rate that put him in the conversation with the best quarterbacks in college football. He did it behind one of the worst offensive lines in the country, taking 94 sacks over 2 seasons. And he kept getting up. He kept delivering. He kept his composure when lesser players would have folded. The scouts knew this. The film was there. And heading into the 2025 draft process, most projections had him going somewhere in the top 10. Some had him as high as 2 or 3. Then came the combine. Sanders announced he would not throw in Indianapolis. He would wait and throw at Colorado's Pro Day instead with his own receivers in a setting where he could perform at his best. His camp explained the reasoning clearly. He wanted to showcase his pass catchers, several of whom were also draft eligible. He wanted conditions that reflected what he could actually do. This is not a controversial decision. It's not unusual. The last 7 quarterbacks taken first overall all made the same choice. Andrew Luck did it. Eli Manning did it. Matthew Stafford did it. Phillip Rivers did it. Skipping the combine throwing session is so common among top quarterback prospects that it barely registers as news when it happens. But when Shedeur Sanders did it, something shifted. Within days, anonymous reports started leaking out of Indianapolis. A quarterback's coach from a top 7 drafting team told reporter Josina Anderson that Sanders came across as brash and arrogant in his formal interview. NBC Sports reported that two teams described him as unprofessional and disinterested. Tom Pelissero of NFL Network reported that a longtime NFL assistant called Sanders' interview the worst formal interview he had ever been in his entire life. One Fox Sports source compared him directly to Johnny Manziel. The Athletic reported he didn't watch enough film. ESPN's Todd McShay reported that Sanders wasn't overly concerned with what teams thought of him. All of it anonymous, all of it damaging, all of it hitting the wires at the same time from multiple directions like it was coordinated. Deion Sanders pushed back. He called the coverage venomous. He said it wasn't even cute anymore, but the damage was done. By the time draft night arrived, Shedeur Sanders, a man who had been mocked as a top 10 pick, had to sit at home and watch 143 players get their names called before his. He fell to the Cleveland Browns in the 5th round. Now, let's talk about Fernando Mendoza. Mendoza played his college ball at Indiana University and spent a little bit at University of Cal. He's a Cuban-American kid, all 4 grandparents born in Cuba. His mother battled multiple sclerosis while he was playing college football. He is by every account a genuinely impressive young man, and his football resume backs that up completely. He won the Heisman Trophy. He led Indiana to a 16-0 record in the program's first national championship. He threw 41 touchdowns against 6 interceptions. He is a legitimate top prospect, and nobody serious is arguing otherwise. In February of 2026, Mendoza appeared on the Pat McAfee show and announced he would not throw at the NFL Combine. He would throw at Indiana's Pro Day instead, with his own receivers in his own environment. Here is what he said almost word for word. And pay close attention because you've heard this before. He said he wanted to throw with his guys, his running backs, his receivers. He said throwing to unfamiliar receivers at the combine wasn't the same thing, and he wanted to give his pass catchers the best chance to show what they could do. That is the same reasoning Shedeur Sanders gave. Nearly identical, not similar, identical. Now, here is what the media said about Fernando Mendoza's decision. Pat McAfee called him generational, said he was super smart, wildly intelligent, and tough. Adam Schefter reported that Mendoza's interview with the Las Vegas Raiders went long because the team enjoyed talking to him so much. Ian Rappaport noted that he was especially respectful of Tom Brady, who is now an owner with the Raiders. ESPN described him as having corporate clarity. Fox Sports published a feature story praising his precision, his preparation, and his character. The Draft Network said his stock remained unchanged and he would be the #1 overall pick. Not one anonymous scout called him arrogant. Not one team executive went to a reporter and called his interview a disaster. Not one analyst reached for the Johnny Manziel comparison. Nobody questioned his film study habits. Nobody said his father's involvement was a problem. The silence where the criticism should have been was deafening, and the people watching noticed. Shedeur's close friend Boogie Knight posted publicly, man, is it okay to do it now? I'm just asking. Social media lit up. Fans pulled the receipts side by side. The same reporters who buried Sanders with anonymous leaks were now writing glowing profiles about a quarterback who made the exact same call. Total Pro Sports ran the headline directly. Double standards emerge as same critics who slammed Shedeur Sanders now back Fernando Mendoza. The Shadow League put it even more plainly. Absolutely, it's a problem when we do it. Now, some people will say, wait a minute. You can't compare these two situations directly. Mendoza won the Heisman. He went 16-0. He's a better prospect than Sanders was. And that's a fair football argument. But that argument doesn't answer the question we're actually asking. The question is not whether Fernando Mendoza is a better prospect than Shedeur Sanders. The question is why the exact same decision produced two completely different responses from the exact same media. Why did one man's confidence get labeled arrogance while another man's confidence got labeled intelligence? Why did one man's father get called a circus while the other man's family story became inspiration? Why did one man's choice to skip combine throwing become a character indictment while another man's identical choice became proof of his selfless team-first mentality? Talent doesn't explain that. Statistics don't explain that. The vocabulary gap between how these two men were covered cannot be explained by what either of them did on a football field. And this wasn't just fans on social media saying so. Ryan Clark of ESPN said it plainly. He said the attacks on Sanders were about more than football. He said the bravado Sanders carried, the way he looked, the color of his skin at that position, all of it was being held against him. Clark called it a character assassination. Stephen A. Smith called Sanders' draft slide a disgrace. He said it felt like Kaepernick level collusion. Skip Bayless called it the biggest smear campaign he had ever witnessed in his years of covering this league. And here's what makes it impossible to dismiss as opinion. The academic research has been saying this for decades. Penn State researchers found that the language used to evaluate black quarterbacks in draft profiles was fundamentally different from the language used to evaluate white quarterbacks, and that those language differences directly affected where players got drafted. A 2023 peer-reviewed study found that black quarterbacks were consistently picked later than white quarterbacks with the same physical tools and the same college production. The bias wasn't a feeling, it shows up in the data. There's also the Archie Manning comparison that almost nobody wants to talk about. In 2004, Archie Manning worked behind the scenes to make sure his son Eli would not play for the San Diego Chargers. Eli refused to be drafted by them. He held his ground and engineered a trade to New York. The media called it savvy, they called it strategic. They called it a father protecting his son's legacy. Deion Sanders said publicly that there were certain cities that weren't going to happen for Sheduer. He referenced Eli Manning by name, and the media called it a circus. Anonymous executives told reporters that Deion's involvement hurt his son's draft stock. Same behavior, same instinct, two completely different verdicts. Shedeur Sanders fell 134 spots from where he was projected. That slide cost him an estimated $13 million in guaranteed money. $13 million. And he has spent his rookie season proving every one of those anonymous scouts wrong, leading all rookie quarterbacks in passing yards and touchdowns from week 12 onward and earning a Pro Bowl alternate selection. The proof was always there. The system just wasn't ready to give him credit for it. Here is what we know for certain. Two quarterbacks made the same decision. One got buried, one got celebrated. The difference wasn't the decision. The difference wasn't the reasoning. The difference wasn't even the talent level. Because the talent conversation and the character conversation are two separate things, and what happened to Shedeur Sanders was a character conversation dressed up as a talent evaluation. The NFL has always had a complicated relationship with black men who carry themselves a certain way, who don't shrink, who don't apologize for their confidence, who look you in the eye and tell you exactly what they think they're worth. That kind of confidence in a white quarterback gets called leadership. It gets called competitive fire. It gets called the intangibles you can't teach. In a black quarterback, that same confidence has historically made people uncomfortable. And when people in power get uncomfortable, they reach for language. They reach for anonymous quotes. They reach for comparisons designed to plant a seed of doubt that the film alone never could. Warren Moon wasn't drafted at all out of college. He had to go to Canada and prove himself for 6 years before the NFL would look at him. Randall Cunningham spent his entire career being called an athlete instead of a quarterback. Donovan McNabb was booed by his own fans on draft day. Lamar Jackson was told to his face by scouts to consider switching to wide receiver. Cam Newton won a unanimous MVP and was still treated like a problem waiting to happen. Shedeur Sanders is the latest name on that list. He didn't make it there because he was arrogant. He made it there because he was confident and black at the most scrutinized position in American professional sports. And the system that evaluates that position has never fully separated those two things. Fernando Mendoza is going to be a fine NFL quarterback. He earned everything coming his way. But the men who praised him in 2026 owe Shedeur Sanders an explanation for what they wrote in 2025. Because the only thing that changed between those two draft cycles was who was standing at the podium. And if we're being honest with ourselves, we already know why. I appreciate you staying to the end of this one. If this story moved you, if it made you think, made you question something you accepted without asking why, then do me a favor and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, because I'm going to keep telling the stories that don't always make the front page. This is Old School Sundays. I'll see you tomorrow.